We'll
Yeah.
crack straight into this. Logan, welcome back to the show. It's such a pleasure to get to speak to you again.
Yeah, I've been excited. I've been excited for this. We've been due for another conversation.
It's been literally years, I think 4 years since we spoke last. So it's been a good amount of time. I want to start somewhere that I know we just plotted out the conversation arc a little bit, but talk to me about Egyptology.
That's amazing. I'm obsessed with Egypt.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, actually, I do know why. Um, are you familiar with Robert Schoch and his work at all?
No, I'm not.
Basically, he's a geologist who has an incredible theory that, uh, you know, let's say that the least controversial version is he observes the erosion, specifically like water induced erosion around the base of the Sphinx, as specifically only possible from extreme top down flooding, which means that this man made structure, at least the base of the Sphinx, which we know has been remodeled and repaired and whatever many, many times, is something like at least 6,000 more years older than we are claiming. And I can tell the second part of his theory in a second, which is really profound if you just do nothing other than do the mental experiment of believing it for a second. But I think the reason why this has made me quite obsessed is we're already in a worldview that perceives things like the pyramids and these massive structures in Egypt as improbable to build at the time scale that we've provided. So if you take this improbable thing and then break your brain and push it back thousands more years, it really starts to challenge our belief system. So specifically, when you consider the second part of his theory, which is that there was a mass extinction, not from a impact of a comet or something like this, but rather from likely a solar event, like a solar flare. He references a mild to the order of like hundreds of magnitude less than what he believes happened, whatever, some 15,000 years ago, happened in like the late 1800s. And it was, there wasn't much infrastructure in terms of like technology, but there were like these stations that all like burst into flames and became obsolete. This is all stuff that's very Googleable. And he said if an event like he's proposing happened in a society that looks anything like ours, it would have resulted in these like global lightning storms, fires, subsequently radiation poisoning. So any mammal of any size exposed for more than a few days would have perished. And so, well, what does this mean? It means like there's a potential that we had a pretty organized, progressive society that was eradicated by a thing that wouldn't have really left a lot of like physical evidence. And then who survives that, right? Well, the people that survive it are the people who either on purpose or coincidentally took shelter behind stone because they would have survived this radiation thing. So then is it a coincidence that at about the same time, on more than 4 continents, there are cave paintings that essentially are just depicting the same thing? And I think you've seen them in the textbook at some point in your life, but it's like they look like stick figures, but with like extra appendages or whatever. And he's like, a rudimentary look at this is some sort of stick figure with extra appendages. He goes, but what I think is happening is that people are trying to articulate this endless lightning storm in the sky in an event that they couldn't perceive as anything other than the biggest event in the history of humanity. And these appear in like China and South America and Italy and North America, and surely these folks were not all emailing each other, right? And so, but yet they're making the same cave paintings at the same time. So it's sort of a paradigm shift to consider that this isn't our first rodeo, so to speak. And you're a smart guy. Maybe I'm halfway a smart guy myself. If we survived an event like this, I think I'm on my like sixth iPhone. I'm not making another one of these. You know what I mean? I've had several cars. I could not possibly build another car from scratch without any infrastructure. You see what I'm saying? And so we would have to like start this party over again. And I don't know. There's a lot of humility in shaking the perception that we are the best, furthest along, most capable version of humanity. And I think there's like wisdom in that and past experience that maybe subconsciously in some way we don't understand, are sort of, it's like the context that we're all in. We're all, I don't know, I'm gonna get the numbers wrong, but it's like we're 20th generation something else, right? And 200th generation something else. How many times has this life cycle happened? And I don't know, but I do know that there's pretty profound evidence that we're not necessarily right about this.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating idea that we are not the, for want of a better term, considering we're talking about floods, high watermark of civilization. Like we're
For
like
sure.
the idea that technology could have been different, and but culturally, societally, we could have been far more advanced than where we are now. It's yeah, mind blowing. Lots of people would consider that for a moment and then think, oh, I'd rather not think about that. Why does it captivate you?
That's so funny. Yeah, I think you're right. Well, I used to say this thing when I wrote my book, and it's like, what is the obsession about this philosophy around how we should spend our time, and like, why is it that you think so much and so deeply and so often about what we are doing here? And the joke I would make is like, well, what like else should we think about? Like laundry? Is that where like I can't seem to care about a lot of parts of life, you know, uh, and and you know when the alternative is things like this. And so I don't know. Maybe I'm unique or something like that, but I don't think so. I think deep down we do have some part of our brain that's curious about things bigger than laundry and what's for dinner.
Yeah, despite that taking 60% of my mental capacity on most days, what am I going to eat?
That's
Yeah,
right.
there's definitely that piece in there. I'm going to guess that for as long as you can remember, you've always been inclined in deeper questions.
Yeah, I think so. I think people would say things to me like as a child that I was, you know, quote unquote old soul. So I think that comes with that kind of territory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Can you remember any stories of being a kid and pondering or ruminating?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it just goes back to the point I was making earlier about the superficial, sort of very uninterested in that. I mean, the superficial version of what I'm trying to say uh, did express itself in my experience in sport. Like lots of young kids want to be an athlete when they grow up, but I think I was somewhat unique in how young and how deeply I thought about uh, like that almost like existential part of that, meaning like I was very almost like in a romantic way tied up in um like what I would have to do to become who I wanted to become. And like as a 9-year old, it's like most kids are just like, where's the ice cream truck? How we, what are we doing this summer? Whatever. And I was thinking about like training and goals and progress and evolution and like how am I going to leave my mark and like weird things that I said one time. I think I recalled this in an interview once, and it's coming up again. I remember being in third grade, not second grade, not fourth grade. I specifically remember third grade, and I remember saying to myself, well, you only do third grade once. So like what's going to be my legacy here? That was like a weird, like that's a weird thing to say for at that age. And it wasn't like a weird toxic pressure thing, but it was sort of like I'm gonna try to win the game. Like what is winning third grade? And I think that's weird. I think
What
now
was
as
winning
an
third
older
grade?
person.
Do you remember?
I mean, I think the only things that I had in front of me to perceive what winning the third grade would be is soaking the soaking up the richness of all of the lessons and doing all the art projects as like hard as I could. Of course, superficial things like getting good grades or like the interpersonal part of it, like creating friendships it was just it was like do everything to the max,
Mm.
right? And but I can see from my seat that like it is maybe a bit bizarre to think about third grade from like a like a legacy perspective. It's like almost hilarious, right? I think people get into you know their 50s and 60s and they start to think, what's going to be my legacy, or something like that. And maybe that's just like blatant egotism as a kid or something, narcissism or something. But obviously I'm biased, but I think that I don't know if you're asking. I think for me, where it comes from is I feel so fortunate and capable that it would feel like a crime to not maximize life.
Mm.
And yeah, I don't know. I don't know how we got here, but I think that the Egypt thing sort of shakes me up because, you know, what if this isn't our only crack at this, you know,
Mm.
life school. And then like what's our duty each time we try this, get a little further along. I don't feel like this is my first try. I fail a bunch or whatever, but I definitely don't feel like I don't know. I think that we're in a practice of consciousness in some ways, and it feels like the only way to contribute during this particular lifetime would be to like find the edges of that in some way.
Mm. When we spoke last, I think we chatted around, and I think maybe this is partly my memory, maybe it's my ability to articulate things now and going deeper into this. Um, I think we talked around mindset for quite a long time. I think we talked around
Mhm.
what creates your mental state and everything that goes with that. What do you think mindset is?
That's a great question. I would say mindset is probably your awareness and uh, how you engage with that awareness. Like how you're perceiving any particular moment and how you right? Because it's not just your perception of the moment, it's what you do with that perception. I think, and I'm just sort of trying to do this live with you. I think mindset is an expression of our perception and how we navigate that, you know, because the experiences change, but you can bring a somewhat controllable mindset to an uncontrollable environment. Two different minds would perceive a similar experience differently. Mindset might be the thing that characterizes those differences, but I'm not sure.
The reason I'm asking is because when I when I think about you and when I think about preparing for this podcast, I see someone who has done kind of been into a lot of these different avenues. I know last time you're working with a therapist, I believe, which typically is more engaging in the emotional side. You have spoken a lot about stoicism and kind
Mhm.
of what is it can be seen as kind of like a harder edged philosophy. I know obviously elite sport has been part of your life. Um, Now to coaching coaches and building businesses and everything else that you're doing, there's a lot of different angles to look in at mindset um, from a variety of different points on a spectrum. So like
Mhm.
what does all that give you on mentality? Obviously you mentioned like the awareness piece, which would be kind of a meditative approach of like what is consciousness, but then the
Yeah.
engagement in that and the I suppose that suggests the fact that you're able to see without the emotional aspect, maybe some stoicism, but also like you're thinking about the emotions as well and you're not dismissing
Mhm.
them. And that is all to say there is very little question within this, but I find it interesting that you've come at this from so many different angles and where you're arriving at.
Yeah, I think that without saying it in this particular way, you're describing or speaking into a progression for me, right? Because if we would have had this interview in 2004, I would have felt very prepared to talk to you about mindset um, at a different level, okay, at a singular level to deploy a mindset to get unique positive outcomes in sport. Um, and I think what you're speaking to is a natural progression. It's a progression that I talk about in the Hold the Standard Summit, for example, which is one about evolution, adaptation, which we would like to embody the sort of classic like Ken Wilber model of like uh, inclusion and transcendence. So to transcend and include. So in the beginning, let's go to the beginning of how I perceive mindset, specifically from a Stoic perspective. Why do I even know about what Stoicism is? Well, because it seems like Stoicism really helps to perform at a high level in environments of uncertainty, because the hallmark of Stoicism is a mastery around that which is inside of your control. So I was trying to make a living playing a horrible sport that involves a whole lot of uh, mastery and failure amongst masters. Okay. And so no one is like immune to the failure that is injected into the sport of baseball, specifically on the offensive side. Okay. So there's several people that'll make 20 to 35 million dollars this year playing this sport and will experience mostly failure, and so there's a certain mentality around that sport that requires you to deploy what is essentially stoicism, meaning you will go mad and ultimately perform less well if you begin to internalize that which is outside of your control. Your past experiences and performances, future anxieties about performances, any other parties involved, umpires, opponents, the weather, injustice, how you're feeling mentally or physically, all these things. And so this is where we see a lot of positivity around mindset, but we can find these dead ends, right? And so I experienced one of the dead ends, which is many times in an effort to perform at a high level like this, athletes, without being coached, by the way, to get to this outcome, and maybe you can relate, and you've seen it in others, create this sort of alter ego, right? They put on a sort of cloak to perform, right? And I had that as well. It was like this other person. And it's really a coping mechanism to try to deploy stoicism in what feels like a really risky environment, high performance. I would imagine that folks in the military can relate. Um, they sort of put their life in boxes and categorize, compartmentalize. And a few years ago, I was able to ask classic mindset coach Michael Gervais about this. And I said, from what I know about development, it seems that integration is key, and that integration is the pinnacle, right? To bring everything along rather than to compartmentalize. So I said, check my work here, because a lot of the best athletes in the world embody this alter ego to perform under the lights. And he actually acknowledged, to my bias, that integration is actually a more evolved mental strategy than the creation of these alter egos. So, and this is a long-winded way of getting to your point, which is the early, younger version of myself, more regressive version of mindset, would dismiss things like emotion, feeling, negative mental states, etc., for the sake of stoicism. Later, changing careers, evolving as a human, being exposed to more complex worldviews around mindset, this idea of integration comes in. And I had a bout with depression that really challenged me beyond description. And I realized that the exercise of exclusion and compartmentalization works extremely well, right until it doesn't. And that to transcend and also include the parts of ourselves that we like to dismiss is, in my opinion, the highest strategy. And so in this sort of, like, you didn't ask me like which is it, stoicism or curiosity about these other parts of us. What I'm saying is that I believe that it's both. Our call to action is to include all of our parts, which ultimately increases your self-awareness. If your full-time job is performing at a high level, but you also have this part-time job or nearly full-time job, not looking at the corners of your life and performance that you don't like, you build a liability for yourself. And you also are generally less aware than someone who can sort of see the entire forest and all of its trees, kind of thing. So there's a little bit of an arc there. It's sort of long-winded, but I do think that my understanding of mindset has included more than it used to.
Yeah. I feel like initially anyway, stoicism was such a useful strategy for myself to get shit done, to get out of my own way and act. And maybe this was myself not applying some of the tool correctly, or maybe it's limitation of stoicism. But I found that I developed the ability to stick my head under the sand, not accept some things that are emotional in nature, to be really destructive after a while. And I also find that as I've made that progression, and this might sound slightly unnerving to those people who really want to achieve status or achieve excellence in a certain area, especially if it's notoriety or very outcome based, that as I've found the limitations of Stoic thinking, I've also been less inclined to push to win for external validation. And like as I've gone through that transcendence through those points, so it's almost like it served a purpose to get me moving. It was like the carrot in front of it was the carrot in front of me that's like, okay, right, this is going to get me to my goals, this is going to get me to this kind of external outcome. But I kind of moved through those and I was like, actually, that wasn't what I was looking for anyway. But an emotional curiosity, as you so nicely phrased it, was what was needed to kind of stop me suffering as much, to be honest, and stop and aid me in just like in my own mental health at a far deeper level.
Yeah. I heard someone say one time, and I'm paraphrasing, and I wish I could quote directly and not even reference the person, but it's like, for what reason should we entertain these conversations, even like the conversation we're having right now? Like, well, what's the point of gathering these tools to move through the ickiness of life, so to speak, right? Like, for what reason? If ultimately achieving the goal doesn't fulfill you in the way that you thought it would, and even if, you know, when you get to the horizon, there you are, and then there's like another like, what's the point of this? And it was sort of like this reverse psychology that I really enjoyed, which was, you know, unless you have unlimited endurance for pain, this is an important pursuit, right? It's like, maybe your own developing your own consciousness doesn't matter at the end of the day, but I hope you have an unlimited, abundant reservoir to endure pain. And I think that's it, right? It's like life presents a certain universal painful experience, and that entertaining these conversations is the most human thing we can do to sort of manage what it means to be alive. And I don't mean that in like a crazy negative way. Um, I think it is the thing that connects us all together. It's very difficult to get a room full of strangers together and find common ground on all of our successes, which is generally what we try to do in a weird way, right? We are generally outward facing advertisements for our own success. We can't wait to proclaim that, show that, display that, be recognized for that, be acknowledged for that. Meanwhile, the only thing that we all have in common is this dissatisfaction, struggle, pain that is particularly universal, and particularly the thing that we all are pretending isn't there. You know,
Yeah,
like
whereas the thing that we
yeah.
want at the end of the day is connection. Like that's what so many of us crave. It is that connection, and which would only be satisfied by offering up a more, finding the limitations of this word, but vulnerable way of being, like more authentic, I suppose, way of being.
Yeah, that's right. And so when you see someone else being vulnerable, what's normally the reaction? Well, normally the reaction that I see is that when someone else is vulnerable, the observers of that vulnerability are generally very appreciative
Mm.
of that experience, right? It's like it comes with a thank you, and oh my God, I'm so inspired. And there's like you said, this connection there. And like, well, why is that? It's not really for the person who's being vulnerable. It's because the people in the audience wish that they lived in a world where they too could be vulnerable, right? And so this is the paradox of, like, you know, if we saw the world modeled to us that we really wanted to live in, we would all do it, right? But group dynamics are weird. Until someone leads in that way, we are all thinking, well, I'm not going to be the one. That's scary. Until further notice, I will project my best version of myself and hide all of my weaknesses and appear strong by doing really the least courageous thing you can do, the least strong thing you can do, which is be unwilling to participate authentically and vulnerably. But when someone else does, golf clap. Oh my God, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. Now let me tell you something vulnerable. It's like you just gave a bunch of people permission to do the thing that we all want to do deep
Mm.
down.
Yeah, like the ability that we all have to put on this suit of armor, this protective nature of like, these are my achievements. And I suppose it's the
Hmm.
persona that maybe we're talking about Stoicism developing in some areas. Like, this is the forward facing me without the Jungian shadow behind it. It's like, this is what I want everyone to see. Like, that is something that we've all developed and we're all mastering, I think, maybe more than ever with the role that social media plays. And I think it's why, well, to kind of to flip your script and point to you as proof of it, I think that's why people find themselves connected to you and attracted to spending time with you, is that authenticity that you display. Like, lots of people have been through struggles with depression, but not all of them are willing to talk about it. And it's such a valuable thing to do, not only for yourself, I think, but for everyone who hears it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to necessarily be this like model for that. I think these platforms are bizarre because um, I think our interpretation of what they are for has evolved sort of collectively. I
Mm.
think you can look back to like the beginning of Instagram. I remember in the beginning of Instagram, I thought it was just a cool thing that made your pictures look different. I didn't even realize it was a social network. So people were like, "Dude, what are you sharing that for?" Like, "Oh shit, you can see that." And then it was like this fun thing, I think, for a lot of people. And then soon it became really contrived, especially for business people. I remember the swipe up feature, I think, changed a lot of our behaviors where it's like, well, this is for work. And because it's for work, I need to curate this thing in a certain way. And we're all sort of going through that and living the consequences of that. But rather than like make the focus on me, I think we can look too at the general trends of that social media conversation. Which, if you look at the general trends as I see them, I'm hoping that the pendulum has swung just about as far as it could swing towards polish and uh, inauthenticity and projection. I mean, I'm sure we have more to go. I mean, we're human beings, right? But but I do find optimism in what you're sort of seeing now, which is a lot of the content, like people that are trying to make content that are, to be quote unquote viral, like the people who are like trying to do social media, like and win social media. What does that content look like? It's like how I made this behind the scenes, how to make a really cool video in 5 seconds. How did I make this picture look so cool? And it's like the less polished, process oriented, rougher around the edges, vulnerable thing, right? And as that pendulum swings back, because we're all a bit burnt out on like face tuned, weird private jet photos, right? Like there's a humanity coming back there. And I think we could use a shift in that way. Because deep down, I think, regardless of our behavior, we would all like to live in a world where we could present our truth, be quote unquote vulnerable, etc. Um, but if you don't have the psychological safety in any environment, whether it's at work or in your family or on social media, if you don't have this psychological safety to be yourself, you won't be yourself. You know, and that's a lot of the work that I do now is like in talking with businesses and my own businesses is the intention at least is to create a container for the expression of wholeness, and not for some like woo woo, like, I don't know, retreat vibes type work environment. That's not the point. The point is to win more games or grow a business or whatever. And it just so happens that there is an intersection with uh, high performance groups and the requisite environment that allows you to show up and give a best effort.
Yeah.
If you and I are going to try to accomplish something nearly improbable together in business or sport or combat or anything like that, I think anyone listening could agree that our best chance for success is to create an environment where you can try your very best and risk failing in doing so, because that's what trying your best at the hardest stuff looks like. And the same is for me. But if you and I create an environment where it's not worth it, or it's too risky, or it's perceived as dangerous to try your best and ultimately fail, or attack things at the edge of your ability, rather it pays to stay more closer to a comfort zone, higher success rate thing. One thing is certain: we may feel better about that, we may feel safer, but we are absolutely not performing at the highest level.
Yeah. Yeah, surface level, we definitely feel safer. Like that's the suit
Yeah.
of armor thing. It feels like we're protecting ourselves without that risk. But yeah, it's definitely insulating as well as protective. It's like protects you from the first things, but it's like insulates you from the real connection that you are seeking in the world. When I was at a recent seminar with Ben Francis, who's the founder of Gymshark, the clothing brand that's
Yeah.
kind of doing some pretty
They're doing
impressive
okay.
things right now. Yeah, they're doing all right. I think they're like $1 billion valuation or something, and they're doing okay.
He's probably all right.
They, yeah, he was
He gets
discussing
the
about.
egg when he gets avocado toast. He gets like the extra egg on there.
Yeah, I think so. I think he does.
Like, yeah, it'll be 2 more pounds. So I'm like, you know what? I think I'm gonna go for it.
He was talking about the idea that you just got to grow at the same speed or faster than the business that you're developing. And I think that applies to whether we're coaches as well, or whether we're applying to being athletes. It's like, yeah, like you've got to grow fast in the results that you want, like personally and emotionally, and that will drag things up. I think lots of people hope that if they aim at success, I'm sure it works to some degree. Like if they aim at success, hopefully it will challenge them and forge them into the person along the way. But I think it's probably more so the other way around, that the results follow the personal growth rather than the growth following the results.
Yeah, I think to back up what you're saying, a way that I often talk about it is, I'll go into a room of people that is full of what they would call themselves like leaders, owners of something, or manager or coach or something like that. And I ask them, who here would like to be bigger, more capable, um, have greater leadership capacity than you do right now? And they all do, like, and I do, and I think probably you do. Uh, and I think that that is indicative of what you're saying, which is, in part, I think all of the things that we want to accomplish is like the line from what is that, Jaws, where they're like, we're gonna need a bigger boat, right? Like, okay, you're gonna need to be a more capable leader to accomplish and embody the things that you're trying to do. Like, where you're trying to go is going to require a different dude than the one sitting in this chair, right? And I think that that's at the heart of what the Gymshark guy is saying, right? Is like, we need to develop the capacity to go on the voyage, and the company that I want to run is going to require someone much more capable than me to run it. So I better get to building it, and that's that, like, development piece, I think, that leads the way, not the other way around. Because said differently, one of the the researchers that I respect the most in this field that I reference probably as much or more than anybody else is Robert Keegan, from the world of adult development and positive psychology. And I mean, I think one of his last books is titled perfectly. It's called In Over Our Heads. You know, we are all technically in over our heads, meaning the capacity we need, quote unquote, or would benefit from having just isn't there yet. You know, we're living in a world of increasing complexity, and we all, I think, can agree that the complexity of the challenges of the day are greater than that of the complexity of leadership ready and willing to solve them. You know, and so this is inviting the, it's like a cringe word at this point, but like the work, right, to develop that capacity. You know, how are we going to figure this out? What insert problem, you know, artificial intelligence and the ethics of that, or global warming, or the interpersonal dynamics at literally any workplace. How are we going to figure this out? Like, because the technology we have right now between the ears, the capacity to hold that is generally not sufficient. Okay, so it's like from a leadership perspective, it's universally important, in my opinion, to engage with this development of consciousness, because I haven't yet met a person who's just, you know, they have a truckload size container for, you know, a handful size problem. It's like the other way around. We got challenges that we just can't hold.
Mm. The way to definitely not solve that problem is ignoring it, acting small, hiding from those bits that are uncomfortable. Uh, it seems like, well, it's definitely true that we need to look in and see those bits that we'd rather not look at. How are you doing that on a consistent basis? Like, do you have techniques that? Do you have processes that you go through? Are you trying to keep in mind certain ideas?
Yeah, so they're both individual and collective, right? So like I said earlier, I perceive that my job and the job of anybody who's trying to build a deliberately kind of developmental organization, or maybe just it's you, maybe just one person to be a developmentally oriented individual, would require the sort of singular, in my opinion, singular ingredient to drive that change, which is if you're in the business of change, specifically growth, you need disconfirming information, right? So if all of the information or the inputs that you seek out or that happen upon you are things that you already believe and are already confirmed in your mind, by that own dynamic, no change will happen. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a bit of a paradox because confirming information feels awesome, right? There's no friction and definitely no change around being right. Okay. And so it is ironic that when I go ask anybody in a position of leadership or anybody who is interested in performance in anything, they all want to be different, specifically better, right? So like, well, what then would yield difference, right? It's like, let's look at it from a evolutionary perspective, right? We need a stressor to drive adaptation, right? Well, we all know how to do this in the gym, or, you know, many of the people listening know how to do this in the gym, right? It's like, you know, you choose the reps and sets and loads that demand adaptation. That's like the art of being a coach, you know. Well, There are even more people, because the answer, in my opinion, is all people. There are even more people who need and want adaptation between the ears than they want in their hamstrings and triceps, you know? And so, like, well, how do we do that? Well, almost no one is deliberately placing themselves in environments to receive this rich, disconfirming information. And a lot of that comes from not having the scaffolding there, not having the structures in place to do that, not having the safety, right? And this is what you can go back to, like the growth versus fixed mindset conversation, right? If you have a fixed mindset in a stereotypical sense from like the work of Carol Dweck, you actually avoid disconfirming information like the plague, right? Because that's all bad news. Well, great. You avoid this thing that is the only thing you need to become different, right? And this is like a self-sealing trap that you can never get out of, right? So I've just been generally answering your question, but specifically, I can give you some examples around the gym. We have specific times and places where they are times and places for specifically disconfirming information. Now, the A plus is that we can create a culture so strong and so committed to evolution that it changes our like water cooler talk, and like the unscheduled, naturally occurring conversations would include a desire for negative feedback and a clear runway to give negative feedback. But we don't rely on that, because it's hard. So, for example, every staff meeting includes a moment in time called the spotlight, which is where we take something that we all participate in and agree upon, and we try to, just for a moment, make it wrong, right? So it's like payroll, how we structure payroll. Let's break it. Spend the next 15 minutes breaking that. And then if you come out on the other end and find out that it could be broken, then maybe it should be changed, right? If not, then we continue with a best so far structure. Other things, we've defined more objectively what excellent coaching is. And so with that rubric, so to speak, we can evaluate our coaching efforts. And so we've normalized the culture where coaching is evaluated and it is expected to receive not just compliments, but like specific disconfirming information about that. I, in a more intangible way, believe, and it's been reflected back to me, that I can curate people well. So the people around me are not enablers of my bullshit, so to speak, right? And so I have diverse folks around me that I highly respect with different perspectives, and the conversations are not this self-aggrandizing, ego-tripped conversations. They're more like, how am I wrong about this? What can't I see about myself right now in this situation? Help me see me, right? My favorite thing to do is I'll sit down with an employee, and it's, there's always power dynamics, regardless of your culture or whatever. And I say, like, what's it like? What am I like? What's it like working with me? How can I be better to work with? What's the worst part about working with me? And I think most people haven't created the environment to where you'd get a great answer from that. But I challenge anybody listening, and I'm stealing this from my friend, mentor, coach, Dr. Kara Miller, which is, she's like, if you took a coworker out to coffee and sat them down and bought them the coffee and just asked that question, what's it like to work with me? And just shut up for the next 45 minutes, you'd hear some shit, but we don't do that. And so it doesn't pave the way for other people to ask the question. We don't really have a great perception of ourselves, going back to like self-awareness. And we're all living in this like first person version of the truth. I'll share a framework. So we have some frameworks that help us also unearth this disconfirming information. One is the 5 perceptual positions, which is really helpful around conflict or negotiation or any just sort of disagreeable moment. Once you outline this to yourself and or other people, you'll never unknow it. And it's a tool that really works. So first perceptual position is that of self. We spend most of our time looking out our own 2 eyes, perceiving a incomplete, biased, untruthful version of reality. First perceptual position, self. Second perceptual position is that of other, which the corny way to say it is like put yourself in someone else's shoes. We generally are not equipped or willing to do this, because if I was to actually do this with the person sitting across from me, I would embody and understand their value system. I would understand and be coming from the position of having their childhood. I would be exactly as tired as they are, exactly as hungry as they are. I would prefer the things that they prefer. I would see the world the way that they see it. Very hard to do. It's worth the mental exercise. Third perceptual position is that of the observer. So any group or any 2 people that are in an environment could have someone who is impartial and doesn't know anything about anyone in the group and is sitting behind an invisible pane of glass on a chair observing from a distance, would be able to see many truths that no individual in that group could see. The fourth perceptual position is that of the group. So when it comes to Deuce Jim, for example, it would be to leave my own awareness and go into the mind of Deuce, which has its own values, its own desires, its own fears, its own experience of any given situation. And the fifth perceptual position is that of our best selves or source or love or God, whatever you want to say. So you can go through any difficult interpersonal situation and invite everyone to sort of go through these perceptual positions. And what it is doing is providing an aggregate of the truth, right? Which is truer than any one of those positions, right? And now just having that like creates a certain environment of being wrong about how you're perceiving something, which offers the opportunity for change. And yeah, so long story short, it's like not just having this worldview of a desire to be better and a desire for disconfirming information, but like building in the plumbing such that you're being delivered on a platter difficult, growth-oriented, disconfirming information in your life.
Yeah. The unique thing about humans, right, is that we can change our environment. That's what kind of separates a lot of what we can do from what other animals can do. And that is an exact example of how we can do that. We can put ourselves in the situation where we have no choice but to grow, because we've, in our more conscious and self-serving moment, we put in place the framework that can help that and that can serve that. The inviting of disconfirming or negative feedback is a necessarily painful thing to do, but obviously it's the only way that we can actually grow to see where we're going wrong. I think this is why Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is such a useful tool, or it was such a useful tool for me, because there's nothing that's more salient to you than being choked unconscious. And it's like, okay, I fucked up. Something actually happened there and I made a mistake. You've got no way of lying to yourself, because there's that very primal thing of like, yeah, my elbow's about to snap in half and I need to tap out and I need to submit to this. It's such a useful tool, but it's rare that we put ourselves in that kind of vulnerable situation where we're willing to be exposed to ourselves and to the tribe.
Totally. And there's also layers to that, because what's baked into the human experience is positive intent, right? So very rarely are there moments in our lives where we're like, I am actively fucking up and I am continually making choices that are ineffective and misguided and quote unquote wrong. Because we come from a place of positive intent, even when we're making mistakes and being, you know, ineffective or in need of behavior change. We're not psychopaths, most people, right? So we are of the belief that we are doing our best with what we have in the blah, 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 the whole story, right? So there are layers to what you just said too, because people will get together and be like, "Hey, do you want to do the let's work on our weaknesses thing?" And it's like, okay, we talk about the like pretend one. You know, I really got to work on A, B, and C, and it's like, meanwhile, all of those relevant parties would never talk about X, Y, and Z when that's the real that's the real issue, so to speak, right? And there are ways to sort of like bob and weave from that, which is difficult. I mean, it's not hypothetically hard. It is hard to change, right? And so many times there are layers to that which we're willing to address. You know, this shows up in team environments all the time too. I'll give you one more framework. It's like, and this really, excuse my language, like fucks groups up, because just like the last framework, when I tell them, they can't unknow it, and they internalize, and they have to acknowledge what I'm about to say, which is anytime you get a group of people together, especially in a work environment or a performance environment of any kind, there are four conversations happening at all times. The first conversation is the explicit one, which is all of the things that are said in the group explicitly. The second conversation are the things that only can be said before the explicit conversation. So you imagine like a corporate team or something like this, you know, or let's just use Deuce Gym. Deuce Gym, we have a staff meeting tomorrow. It's a marketing meeting. There are conversations that will happen between employees before the meeting in Slack, text message, by the water cooler, whatever, that would never come up in the meeting for a lot of self-protecting reasons. The third conversation are the conversations that happen after the meeting, right? So the meeting happens and we all agree upon all the things and we talk about the things and give the objectives, and then we leave the meeting, and then there's the like, how about that fucking idea, huh, Ralph? Yeah, classic. Stacy again with like a weird comment. Okay, so that conversation is not safe to be made explicit in the team conversation, but is happening at all times afterwards. And then the fourth one is the scariest one, which is the conversation happening in your head that you would never speak out loud into the situation. And the reason why I say this is like there is important wisdom in all four of these conversations, but the only one that can be acted upon and isn't creating toxic protection from this valuable information is the first one, the explicit one. So teams that can make more of these elephants in the room explicit, right? You'd have to create an environment to do that, are able to benefit from the exchange of essentially the type of data that would make for a better team, right? But we sort of aid and abet these corners that we're not allowed to address, and is really dangerous. You know, this is the self-protecting mechanism at play, you know.
We've spoken about two ways to encourage that negative feedback. One of them has been establish a culture around you or a community around you that reflects things back on you. The other one has been, I think, aim at challenging things is a way of putting, like, aim at excellence, push yourself, find your limits. Are there any other ways that you have in mind that facilitate this negative feedback?
I think those are the two big ones, because you know they both invite you know, failure and a naturally occurring feedback loop, so to speak. But I will add on to this, and anybody who's listened to me talk knows what I'm about to say, is like there are two required ingredients for any of this to take hold, which is, and it's almost like there's correlation between the greater presence of these two ingredients, the greater potential top end performance, and they are trust and willingness. Okay, and so you can put yourself in an environment to chase excellence, or you can create a culture around you that'll give you negative feedback. But if there's not remarkable levels of trust in the system and willingness in the system, that feedback won't be heard or acted upon or integrated, right? And so these are a premium. You know, many people are willing to quote unquote, be uncomfortable, be comfortable with the uncomfortable, do all the hard things. They'll do 50,000 thrusters, but they will not have a conversation about their insecurities. Like, okay, well, that's not really being uncomfortable, right? It's like trading one version of discomfort that you prefer over the real discomfort that you don't prefer, right? And so really high levels of trust and willingness are needed for adaptation. Like I say that, like, without trust and willingness, going to therapy is just an expensive conversation. It's like we need to have these ingredients for adaptation to occur.
Yeah, like you've put me into a self-reflective mood, which is a good thing. Yeah, the piece that keeps on getting me is the idea that, yeah, I can reflect on my own, I can try and encourage my own negative feedback. I can try and look in and think, what am I doing wrong? But if I'm always seeing it from the same lens, then it's never going to change. Like the analogy about, if I've got a statue in front of me and I'm looking at it from one vantage point, for all I know, it could be a very good 2D model. It requires me to walk around it, see it from different angles to establish that A, it's a statue, and B, what it looks like from all angles, and therefore see the truth of it. And that culture community piece is a huge part of that. Like, personally speaking now, I'm very good at putting myself in challenging situations as much as I know. But encouraging the culture is probably the more uncomfortable step there, because you're inviting negative feedback and discomfort on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think that there's more complexity here that's probably, a whole other podcast in and of itself. But part of this ongoing, I think the way you said it is great, like with the statue, being able to see it from different vantage points, because uh, the act of change behavior or adaptation is specifically one of adaptation, and that generally speaking is not a process fueled by information. So yeah, you can get feedback and whatever, and it's great. But think about how many change behavior issues are persisting, not for a lack of information. So you have had direct experience with this with your clients and maybe yourself and people in your life. Um, how many people do you know that are trying to lose weight have the information that would help them lose weight? They have the diet. They actually are an expert in 5 different nutritional strategies that would yield these results, but some other thing is in the way, right? In the summit, I sort of realize all around the world that there are not that many different problems, like core problems, like real barriers to people's lives. Um, one of the ways this is manifested is people don't start what they finish. They're chronic procrastinators. Like, they don't execute. Okay, well, even the people who are telling me about this problem of procrastination and an inability to finish what they start. Do you think it is because they don't know that it would be better if they finished what they started? Like they're not of the belief that procrastination is serving them,
Mm.
right? And so what are they going to do? They're going to hire me to tell them, "Hey, you should finish what you start." Oh, fuck, dude. Thank you so much. Like now I'll just do that, right? And then I just like pour gas on the fire and I'm like, "Okay, what if I printed out 800 pages of scholarly research that proves that finishing what you start is definitely better than procrastinating." You read through those and then just change your behavior? Of course not, because it's not a matter of more information. Okay, so then this gets to, the complexity of what is probably a whole nother podcast, but adaptation would require the person with the problem to evolve to be a new person to solve it, and so we really run into trouble. And I don't mean this as a discount to your podcast or anybody else's, but it's like, our greatest challenges will not be specifically solved by reading another book or
Mm.
listening to a podcast or hiring a coach. You would have to, yeah, like definitely do those things, but you would have to do something about it. You would have to do the adaptation part. And that is not a thing that you can outsource.
Yeah, exactly. We used to get quite a lot of people coming to work with us, and they knew that on a physical level they had to put the sets and reps in. Like it was obvious to them. It's like, okay, if I'm in the gym, I have to put sets and reps in. I have to increase my volume or my intensity or change variables, or I have to change techniques or whatever it is. I have to put the sets and reps in to create that hardwired pattern. But there was a, thankfully it's changing now, but there was a proclivity to think, oh, by hiring a coach, that is my mentality is going to change now. That is the change I'm going to create is going to be solving that. It's like, no, you have to put the sets and the reps into. You have to physically go through and mentally go through those practices of thinking the thoughts you want to have, of changing those, of generating perspective on your emotional state. And that's the thing that is, well, yeah, it's hard work, right? It's actual effort. It's a somewhat stressful, although hopefully you stressful as opposed to distressful intention or yeah sensation on the body, stimulus on the body. So like hopefully that's changing it. There was a piece that you were talking about back then about shutting off data points, and I think that's the limitation of stoicism that we're talking about right at the beginning to finish off the loop. I think that's like I felt like at some degree, and maybe this was my incompetence with stoicism because occasionally I haven't been 100% perfect in everything that I've done. I might have been shutting off those data points and not giving myself the opportunity to see my life from these are the emotional perspectives that actually are a part of my life and are dictating my results and are dictating everything else, but I choose not to see them. So that was a really nice kind of full circle there.
Totally. And it's a paradox, right? Like, the tongue-in-cheek way to say it is you can't argue with results, right? So
Mm.
if you if you are the perfect stoic, but the outcomes in your life are poor, meaning you're an asshole or you're still not performing at a high level or whatever's going on, it's like, okay, well, how's that working for you? Like you can be I make this joke all the time. You can be 100% compliant to the paleo diet and get yourself a fresh case of diabetes, just firing down 20 bananas a day, right? You're following the rules, but you have no results, right? And so the paradox of leadership or the paradox of performance or the paradox of all these things that we're talking about is you don't get to absolve yourself of the responsibility. You can't just follow the rules and say, hey, my hands are tied here. I did everything I could, right? Bananas are after all paleo. It's like, okay, well you gained, you know, 20 pounds of non-lean tissue and you're worse than when you started. So what's the prize here? you know.
I think that's a great place to wrap up, dude. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. It's always fun rapping with you. You threw me a curveball at the Egyptology thing. I love that.
That's the intention. Yeah, not looking to
That's
go
right.
down the standard route. Thank you, man. Where can people find out more about you? Where can people find out about Hold the Standard, and your mentorship and everything that goes along with that? Oh, and also, actually, I'm not going to let you go quite yet. Talk to me about, is it voluntary work, or you've got some sort of organization going? I have been spending less time on social media, so
Yeah,
for
no
my
worries.
sins, I haven't followed you as much as I haven't. But yeah, there's been this community aspect to this that you're developing, right?
Yeah, we started a nonprofit through the gym, which is rooted in leadership development, called Deuce Community, and we serve three populations that generally overlap quite often, which is system impacted individuals, so folks who are currently or formerly incarcerated, folks experiencing homelessness, and or folks who are substance impacted, so seeking sobriety or currently sober. And yeah, we basically find through training programs and collaborations, we find the most motivated, capable people in those communities, and we basically hire them to develop themselves. And so we have, shoot, in the last couple months, we've had three three folks released from prison who were able to work with us with an ankle monitor. So now they have a little bit more freedom, but they're still working with us. The first person who went through the program, David, is now living up in San Francisco. He's a professional coach. Did many years in prison, and he's making a hell of a life for himself as a leader. And we're not stopping anytime soon.
That's great. Really nice to hear. Really nice to
Yeah,
hear. And
cool.
congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Um,
Yeah, appreciate
so
that.
where can people find out more about you? Back to that question.
Yeah, no worries. I'm on just Twitter and Instagram at functional coach, all one word. The continuing education and seminars, ebooks, all that stuff is at deucegym.com/university.
Mhm.
And yeah, not hard to find. I'm around. I like to respond to people, so shoot me a message.
Perfect. Well, great place to wrap up. Thank you, man.
Yeah, thank you. This is awesome.